Welcome to Stories Before 3 a.m., where the ordinary becomes terrifying. Tonight, we explore 3 haunting tales that will chill you to your core. First, a student moves into a dorm with a dark reputation. Strange noises from the floor above start disrupting his sleep. But the source may be more disturbing than he ever imagined. Next, Daisy experiences a shocking moment outside her friend's dorm. What seemed like a typical morning turns into an unforgettable encounter that leaves her questioning everything. Finally, a man hears the unsettling sound of children playing outside his dorm in the dead of night. What he sees when he looks out will make him wish he hadn't. Prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown, where every whisper in the dark could be more than just the wind. Let's step into the shadows together. The following stories are based on personal beliefs. Please listen with discretion. This story comes from David, who shares a chilling experience from his university days. Early on, when he couldn't secure a room in the campus dorms, he had to look for accommodation elsewhere. The available places were either too expensive or fully booked, but a senior recommended a cheap dorm. However, there was a catch. It was infamous for being haunted. Specifically, room 713 on the 7th floor had a dark history. A female student once hanged herself there after a failed exam. The 7th floor had since been sealed off. Despite this, David, not believing in ghosts, decided to rent a room in the dorm. He ended up in room 613, right below the notorious room 713. On his first night, David heard unsettling sounds from above, like a chair being dragged across the floor, followed by a loud crash. The noises persisted nightly, but after a while, he became accustomed to them. One night, however, after an especially long day, he snapped. Frustrated, he shouted into the darkness, "What the fuck is your problem? I'm trying to sleep! Shut the hell up, you worthless loser!" To his surprise, the noises stopped immediately. But shortly after, the dragging sound returned, even louder and faster than before, ending with an even more violent crash. David's bravado vanished, replaced by fear. Had the ghost just responded to his outburst? The next day, something even stranger happened. While riding the elevator back to his room, David, distracted by his phone, stepped out and realized he was on the 7th floor, a floor that should have been locked and inaccessible. Confused and uneasy, he noticed the hallway was covered in dust and smelled damp and musty. Worse still, the door to room 713 was ajar. As he stood frozen in place, he saw a figure emerge. A woman with her head bowed, a noose still hanging from her neck. Her slow, deliberate footsteps echoed toward him. Panicked, David tried to flee, but the elevator doors had closed behind him, and the emergency stairs were blocked by a steel gate. He pounded on the gate, calling for help until the dorm caretaker finally arrived and unlocked it, allowing him to escape. For weeks afterward, David stayed with friends, too terrified to return to his room. But with no other options, he eventually decided to move back, determined to avoid the elevator at all costs and only use the stairs. Then, one night, after returning from a friend's birthday party, David, feeling exhausted, made the mistake of taking the elevator again. When he reached his room, the door was slightly ajar. Although confused, he assumed he had forgotten to lock it earlier. He checked the room and found nothing out of place, so he locked the door and went to bed. That's when it happened. As he was about to fall asleep, David felt a heavy pressure on his chest, paralyzing him. He couldn't move. In the corner of the room, he saw her, the woman from room 713. She was sobbing quietly, dragging a chair into the middle of the room. Slowly, she climbed onto the chair, tied a noose to the ceiling fan, and kicked the chair away. David could only watch in horror as she struggled, gasping for breath before her body went still. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. Just as she appeared, she vanished, leaving him drenched in cold sweat. Terrified, David called his friend, asking him to come to the dorm immediately. When his friend arrived and knocked on the door, David tried to unlock it, but found it was already open. His friend, standing outside, insisted that the door was locked and he couldn't get in. David, confused and scared, looked around the room. He realized it was not his room. The walls were old, covered in cobwebs, and the air was filled with a foul, musty stench. Worst of all, when he checked the door number, it wasn't 613. It was 713. Shaking with fear, David bolted out of the room. As he ran down the hallway, he heard a woman's mocking laughter behind him, growing louder with every step. He reached the emergency stairs, but the gate was locked. In a moment of sheer desperation, he kicked it open and fled downstairs, where his friend and the caretaker were waiting. After that night, David left the dorm for good, spending time with his family and staying at a temple for nearly 2 weeks. Reflecting on his experience, he realized that everything might have started when he yelled disrespectfully. Now David knows better than to challenge things he doesn't understand. Daisy often spent her nights out with friends and, after too many drinks, would crash at a close friend's dorm, a 9-story building where her friend's room was on the 8th floor. For years, nothing strange had ever happened there. But that changed one morning. After another night of heavy drinking, Daisy woke up feeling hungry and groggily made her way down the stairs to buy some food. As she stepped outside and was about to cross the street to grab some grilled pork, a sudden, loud thud reverberated behind her. The sound was so close, like a heavy sack hitting the ground just a few steps away. Daisy froze, her heart pounding as she thought, "That almost hit me." But when she turned to look, terror gripped her. She sprinted, not daring to look back, running until she reached the end of the street, where a motorbike taxi driver, someone who often drove her, asked in shock, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" Still sobbing, she blurted out, "A man? He jumped off the building. He fell right behind me." The driver tried to calm her down and offered to take her back to the dorm. When they returned, a crowd had already gathered. Daisy, trembling, pushed through the people, and what she saw would haunt her for life. The body was shattered, limbs twisted unnaturally, one leg bent across the curb. But what truly shook her to her core wasn't just the horrific scene. It was the fact that as the man hit the ground, his eyes had locked with hers. That lifeless gaze stayed with her long after. The rescue team arrived and took the body away. Word spread that the man had taken his life due to family issues. He lived on the 9th floor, directly above Daisy's friend's room. Over the next few days, everyone on the 9th floor moved out. Daisy's friend, however, wasn't the superstitious type. In fact, she found the whole thing intriguing. One day, she casually joked with Daisy and their other friends, "Do you think he's still around?" One of the group, feeling bold, suggested, "If you want to know, let's find out." At the front of the building stood a small shrine, and they decided to make an offering. Lighting incense, they said, "If you're still here, come play cards with us tonight. Pick any card you like, and if you're still here, give us a sign." They left the incense burning and returned to the dorm, sitting down to play a game of rummy. But something strange happened. No matter how much they played, they couldn't finish the game. Then they realized one card was missing. Despite searching everywhere, it was nowhere to be found. That's when they remembered their invitation to the spirit. Panic set in, and they rushed to the shrine pleading, "We know you're still here. Please return the card." They nervously went back to the dorm, but instead of stopping at the 8th floor, the elevator took them to the 9th, a floor now abandoned and eerily dark. No matter how much they pressed the button, the elevator wouldn't move. It was as if something was holding them there. For 5 long minutes, they stood paralyzed, hearts racing, afraid that the spirit might actually appear. Suddenly, one of them shouted, "Run!" They bolted for the stairwell, screaming all the way down to the 8th floor. Bursting into the room, they froze. There, on the bed, lay the missing card, the Queen of Spades, despite their earlier search that had turned up nothing. That night, none of them dared sleep alone. They huddled together, barely drifting off until the first light of dawn. But Daisy was the first to wake, stirred by the sunlight filtering through the balcony window. Just as she opened her eyes, she saw it. The unmistakable silhouette of a person falling past the window. Her heart stopped. There was no one on the 9th floor. No one should have been there. Daisy immediately woke her friends and they rushed downstairs, but there was no body, no trace of anything. Shaken, Daisy later asked the dorm manager why everyone had moved out from the 9th floor. At first, he was reluctant to answer, but after some persistence, he finally revealed the truth. They say people heard crying and strange noises like furniture being dragged, and everyone swore the sounds came from the room of the man who died. But the room's been locked from the outside since his death. Daisy and her friends, now terrified, went to the shrine once more to make a final offering, asking for forgiveness. Soon after, they all moved out of the dorm. Daisy swears that on the day she left, she still felt the presence of the man, as if he were falling again, right behind her. Even now, just thinking about it sends chills down her spine. But the story doesn't end there. Sometime later, Daisy attended another gathering near the university. The area was less developed back then, surrounded by thick, overgrown trees. After the party, Daisy drove home, still a little drunk. Suddenly, she collided with a pickup truck. Her car flipped, leaving her unconscious until the rescue team arrived. When they found her, they shook her gently, calling her back to consciousness. "Miss, wake up." "Are you okay?" they asked repeatedly, their faces serious. "Where are your friends? The 2 people who were with you?" Confused, Daisy replied, "Friends? I was alone." The rescue worker insisted, "No. Witnesses said they saw 3 people in the car, 1 man in the passenger seat and a woman in the back, both covered in blood." Daisy, growing frustrated, repeated, "I'm telling you, I was alone." When she arrived at the hospital, the same questions followed. Where were the others? Even the local officer was perplexed. But Daisy held firm. She had been alone. Everyone fell silent, the air growing heavy with a realization. Perhaps, just maybe, the 2 figures seen in the car were something else. Later, Daisy went to inspect her totaled car. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had ridden with her that night. Curious, she asked the locals about the accident site. and they told her a chilling tale. Many had died at that very spot, and survivors often spoke of an unseen force, a force that would blind them, leading to deadly collisions. A cold shiver ran down Daisy's spine when she heard that only a day before her accident, a couple had been killed in a crash at the same intersection. Daisy, terrified, sold her car after it was repaired, swearing never to drive a car again. Since then, she's only ridden motorcycles, and to this day, at 34 years old, she refuses to touch a car. Before I begin, let me clarify that I've never believed in ghosts. I don't believe in religion either. I only trust things that science can explain. But I've always enjoyed ghost stories and horror films because they're thrilling and fun, even though I constantly remind myself that they're just made-up tales. That was until a few months ago when I broke up with my girlfriend. I had to move out of our shared condo on very short notice, and finding a new place became a necessity. The dorms near my university were expensive, with large upfront deposits that I couldn't afford, and I didn't want to ask my parents for help because they would undoubtedly want me to move back home. I found a cheap dorm in a remote, eerie alley. It was practically in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests and a few scattered houses. The dorm was a low-rise building, only 3 floors, and I was assigned to room 311. The room itself was basic, just a mattress, an old wardrobe, and a small table. There wasn't much to complain about given the incredibly low rent and the fact that I didn't have to sign a long-term lease. At first, living there was uneventful. The dorm was quiet with only a few tenants. However, things started to change after about a month. It began with strange dreams. I'd be walking through a dark, endless void, feeling an unseen presence trailing behind me, watching me. Every time I tried to turn around, I couldn't. I brushed it off at first, but the dream recurred. I found myself having the same unsettling experience over and over again. Then one night, I stayed up late gaming with my friends. Around 2 a.m., I heard the sound of children running and giggling outside my room. I froze, confused, and cautiously looked outside through the slats in the window. No one was there. It happened again. And this time I asked my friends if they could hear it too. Some of them said they vaguely did, but no one could explain it. The more I heard it, the more uneasy I became. One evening, I mustered up the courage to ask my neighbors if they had heard anything unusual. To my shock, they admitted that they often heard the sound of children running in the hallways late at night but were too afraid to investigate. That night, the fear truly set in. I couldn't stop glancing out the window. Something inside me was compelled to keep checking, as if I wanted to see what might be lurking out there. At around 3 a.m., I looked out once again, and my blood ran cold. 2 children, a boy and a girl, stood under the dim streetlight near the dorm, facing away from me. They were perfectly still. My heart pounded as I closed the curtain, trying to shake off the fear. When I finally dared to look again, they were gone. The next night was even worse. After hearing the familiar sounds of running and laughter, I sat at my desk trying to distract myself. Suddenly, there was a loud banging on my door. 3 sharp knocks that sent chills through my entire body. I jumped up and rushed to the door, but when I peered out the window, no one was there. My gaze shifted to the streetlight, and once again, the 2 children were standing in the exact same spot, motionless, their backs turned to me. I panicked, scrambling to grab my phone and keys. Just as I was about to leave, the power went out, plunging my room into darkness. I screamed, fumbling with the door, but it wouldn't open. Then I heard it. A soft knocking all around the room, followed by faint giggles, growing louder and louder. My heart raced as I yanked the door open and sprinted to my motorbike without daring to look back at the children under the streetlight. I rode away feeling the darkness press in from every direction. Even in the safety of the night, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was following me. The next morning, I returned with a few friends to collect my belongings. I left that place behind, haunted by unanswered questions. What were those sounds? Who were those children? And why did it all seem to revolve around room 311? I'll never know, and I don't want to. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss an update.